Oh, hello, Internet friends. How are you doing? My name is Stephanie Bree, and today we're talking indie comics, independent comics. We're not talking about Image, we're not talking about Dark Horse and Archie, we're not talking about any of the big name publishers. We're talking about those comic books that your friends publish, on the web or from their garage or whatever. Now, sometimes on very rare occasions, an indie comic will blow up. The most famous example was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then become mainstream. But there's a lot of indie comics out there that are nothing like what you're used to. So, as the title implies, the question I'm asking is, are indie comics any good? Well, that's an unfair question to ask because, there's good and bad in all comics, right? But there's a couple of things I like about indie comics that draw me to them more so than most of the mainstream comics, although I do read a lot of the mainstream stuff as well. In particular, Marvel and DC, as well as Archie and IDW, and some Dark Horse, and, maybe some Image back in the day, but not so much these days. But, anyways, indie comics are not beholden necessarily to stockholders or publishers or, business people, air quotes. They're pretty much like they have the creative freedom to just tell the stories they want to tell and draw the pictures they want to draw and publish the books they want to publish. Now, the downside to this is they're doing it themselves most of the time, which means they either have to crowdfund everything or they have to put it out with their own money, which means they have a limited reach more often than not. You're going to find a wide variety of subject matter in indie comics from all over the place. Stuff that they don't tackle, the mainstream publishers don't usually tackle. Mostly what I'm looking for from indie comics, I like horror comics that aren't necessarily restricted by the fears and whatnot of the big publishers, who are like, hey, that's too extreme for us or whatever. We don't think that'll fly or whatever. But I also like down to earth human stories, which you don't usually get a lot of from the mainstream publishers. The mainstream publishers, aside from Archie, are like very, very, very heavily skewered towards superheroes and sci-fi action stuff. Transformers, G.I. Joe, Ninja Turtles, etc. On in addition to superheroes. Well, I said Archie is the exception because their stories, while very heavily satire and comical in nature, are pretty down to earth. They're pretty realistic. At least the Archie, the Jughead, the Betty and Veronica, etc. The staples are pretty grounded in reality. But outside of that, most of your mainstream big publishers are like superhero and sci-fi stuff. So it's a lot harder to find, the real stories. It's a lot harder to find horror stories that aren't watered down for mainstream audiences, which is one of the things I like about indie comics. Now, the downside, unfortunately, there is a downside to indie comics. More often than not, they ain't got no money. And that means they don't have the ability to publish comic books in the numbers in terms of quantity of available units, as well as number of issues as the big companies. So a lot of times you're waiting a long time for their next issue to come out. And they're going to be limited in supply, which means you're going to be either trying to, pre-order them or you're SOL because you don't want to pay the, scalper prices on eBay. Or you can't find anybody who sells it because nobody's heard of them. So that is one of the drawbacks. The other drawback to indie comics, again, goes back to they don't usually have a lot of money, which means a lot of times, I'm not going to say they're lesser quality than the mainstream stuff, but a lot of times they have to sacrifice, like, print paper quality, or using black and white instead of color, or, they just can't draw as many panels. So they have to rely more on, like, establishing shots with a lot of text and things of that nature, or whatever. Because, they got to fill the pages, but they don't have the money to be able to produce a product that is on par with what you'd expect. This is not always the case. Sometimes, if you have a good team, a good writer paired with a good artist, and sometimes a third person, an editor or somebody to help, tie it all together, they can pull it off. But a lot of times you have like one person doing it all. One or two people doing everything. Which I would argue is pretty cool, because it's, it's that artistic spirit, it's like, hey, we just want to put this out there, and we don't care if like only 5 people read our shit. That's 5 people whose lives we touched. You know what I mean? I myself have produced exactly 2 indie comics in my lifetime. None of them are available in any format that you're going to be able to find, unfortunately. They were one-offs, but it was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun. I am not an artist, so if I ever did get the itch to produce a comic book again, I would have to partner with somebody who can draw. It's something I've contemplated over the years, but like, not enough that I wanted to like actually take the initiative to do anything about it. It's one of those things, if like an artist approached me and said, hey, I like your writing, etc., blah blah blah, you want to help me make a comic book, I would like talk to them at the very minimum. But like that's pretty much it. I'm not like seeking it out. But I am seeking always new indie comics. I also like fantasy and twisted fairy tale type comics that you can find a lot of times in indie comics. And I love going to New Comic Book Day and discovering new books and new artists and writers and creators that I've never heard of. Because that's really awesome when you find somebody that's putting something out that just speaks to you. It's like, hey, this is what I'm looking for in a book. Now, like I said, on extremely rare occasions, an indie comic will actually become a financial and critical enough success to cross over into the mainstream and get the eyes of maybe one of the big publishers, not the big 2, usually Marvel, DC, but maybe one of the other ones like IDW or Dark Horse or somebody else. Back in the day, we had Bongo Comics, which, god damn, I miss Bongo Comics. I really do. God damn, they were one of the best comic book. I fucking loved Bongo. I miss them. I wish somebody would fucking find a way to revive them. It pisses me off that they died the way they did. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. I'll have to do a whole retrospective on Bongo one of these days. But anyways, I highly recommend following comic creators on Twitter or wherever you go for your social media. And here on YouTube. I'm not going to identify any because there's too many, and if I leave somebody out, I'm going to hear about it. And if I pick the wrong person, I'm going to hear about it. So I'm just going to let you do your own research. That being said, I definitely do, from time to time, browse Kickstarter for indie comics. Not necessarily to contribute to financially, because I'm on such a limited budget. But if I find one I think is cool, I'll talk about it on one of my podcasts where it's appropriate, and share the links, if I'm able to. So, are indie comics good? Well, as a concept and as a practical reality, yes, they're a good thing for the industry. and for artists and creators. So yes, they are good. I'm not saying every indie comic ever made is good, but I'm not saying every X-Men book that's ever been published is good either, and I fucking love the X-Men. I live for the X-Men. But yeah, there's a lot of fucking rubbish out there all the way around. So, yes, I think indie comics are worth investigating, and they're definitely, they're definitely worth at least looking into. Stay cool.